We welcome in John McMullen at this time every day on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, and we're continuing our preview of teams that are chasing the Eagles. Today we've got the Browns and the Bears, but Johnny Mac, first we'll start out with some DeMarco Murray news. How are you on this Friday, John?
Doing well. How are you, Pete?
Doing okay, bud. And DeMarco Murray, what a legendary Eagle, right?
Yeah, not the most well-loved guy. Probably his legacy with the Eagles will be probably that flight back, sitting next to Jeffrey Lloyd and complaining. I think, if you look at the history of this game and running backs, it bears out time and time again. For people that have seasons where they touch the ball a ton, and if you go back to 2014, that was the year DeMarco had the great season, was in MVP contention with Dallas, touched it 450 times, and he was just never the same after that. And unfortunately, the Eagles got him in 2015.
How do you think that he'll be remembered, though, overall? Because when he did get to Tennessee, they cut him on March 8th, but when he did get to Tennessee, he gave him a little push at the end.
Yeah, he had a decent year in Tennessee in 2016, and then kind of tapered off last year. But he was never the same back that he was in Dallas. And people will say he had the best offensive line in football at the time, but he had a really spectacular year and was the key to that team, which was a very, very good team that year. That was when the Cowboys were sort of ping-ponging back, having the one great season, bad season, great season. But he's, certainly not going to be regarded as a great running back. The longevity's just not there, but he certainly had the one great season. And if you think about, remember that committee back approach that was going to be here in Philadelphia when he came? It was him, it was Ryan Matthews. They signed him at the same time. And then you have old Darren Sproles, and only one of them is still playing, and that's Darren Sproles.
John McMullen with us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as DeMarco Murray announces his retirement today. Other league-wide news, John, that I at least found interesting was the news this morning that Ray Lewis lost half his followers when he lost the bots. Do you think Ray Lewis was buying Twitter followers?
Yeah, I mean, it showcased. That's what I don't have a ton of followers, but I didn't lose any, Pete. So none of mine are fake. Cross fingers, at least to this point. But yeah, there's a lot of people that got exposed a little bit today across entertainment because, hey, and you know what? I don't criticize them because so many people in this industry, people of power, look at that as some kind of currency and sort of judge you on Twitter followers or Facebook likes, and it's a bad way to go about certainly journalism. But in the case of Ray Lewis, I mean, he's a Hall of Fame player. He doesn't need to buy followers, so I don't know why he would be.
John McMullen's Twitter account, by the way, at JF McMullen, where you can follow him. You do have the blue check, John. I don't think I ever got the blue check. I mean, who'd you pay to get that?
I didn't pay anybody. I woke up one day and there it was.
So you don't even know how you got it. That's the beauty of it.
I can't even explain it. I don't know Twitter's policies as far as that goes. I'm on the radio a lot, so I don't know. Other than that, and my syndicated column was, for many years was in places like the Los Angeles Times and Miami Herald. So I think it probably had more to do with that.
Well, John McMullen's with us. He is on the radio a lot, specifically 4 o'clock each day at this time as we preview both the Eagles and things around the league. And what we're doing now, because it's kind of the quiet time, the calm before the storm when the Eagles get back into camp, is talking about the teams that are chasing the Eagles. And today we've got the Browns and the Bears. So why not start with the Browns, John? Why not start in Cleveland, where it seems like they're always starting over?
Yeah, and by definition, I guess you have to start over when you're 0-16. There's nowhere to go but up, and they'll certainly be a much improved team. I think you could argue they would have been a 3-4 win team last year if they had even somewhat competent quarterback play, and that's what they'll have this season with Tyrod Taylor. And we'll see if Baker Mayfield can develop, and that's what will have to happen for them to take the next step. But they're going to be a much improved team. And I compared them to Jacksonville yesterday a little bit, at least the early stages of Jacksonville, who was so bad for so long and sort of picked at the top of the draft for so long that all of a sudden you looked up one day and said, wow, they got a lot of good football players. That could happen with the Cleveland Browns in a couple of years. But if they're to get to where Jacksonville is now, you would have to think that Baker Mayfield's going to have to be at least an above-average starter in this league.
Yeah, when you bring up Baker Mayfield, I've seen a lot of people assess it that if Baker Mayfield's the future, Tyrod Taylor is the present, and he's important to sort of bridge that. What do you think Tyrod Taylor's role is this season to come in, and how important is he to, quote-unquote, the process that they're going through in Cleveland?
I think he's a big part of it because it takes some of the pressure, the immediate pressure off Baker Mayfield. Now, you're always going to have it when you're picked at the top of the draft in number 1 overall, but there's not that necessary need to sort of push him to be the week 1 starter because Taylor's been a starter in this league for a long time now, and he's competent. He's not going to wow anybody, but he doesn't make a lot of mistakes, and he's not going to beat you. It's the best definition of Tyrod Taylor. He's probably not going to win you many games either. But for a team like Cleveland that lost games at that position through constant mistakes, that's a big thing to have a guy who's not going to shoot himself in the foot and help the team shoot itself in the foot. Those days are probably over for Cleveland as long as Tyrod is under center.
John, you're talking about the quarterback here for the Cleveland Browns. The Browns have a couple good receivers in Landry and Gordon. What are the expectations for that duo, and where do you rank them among the best duos as far as receivers in the NFL?
Well, if you can tell me Josh Gordon's going to be out there for 16 games, it's pretty good. I mean, but I don't know how you can count him. I just don't know how you can. If you're the Cleveland Browns, you sort of just cross your fingers and hope for the best. But you sort of have to have your plan B set up. But, I mean, he proved how good he was the 1 year he was able to stay on the field. You remember he was suspended for the first 2 games, so he only played 14 games, still led the NFL in receiving yards. That's how dynamic and talented he is. And obviously it wasn't exactly Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers throwing it to him. It was a lot of Brian Hoyer. So he was he's dominant physically, but you just can't count on him. And Jarvis Landry, he's paid a lot of money, and he's a great slot receiver, but I think that's what he is. I think he's a slot receiver. And I think if you're expecting him to make plays outside the numbers, you're going to be unhappy with that. Now, if Gordon's out there, you don't need that. But if he isn't out there, all of a sudden, I don't think he's as dominant. So that's a lot of money to pay for a slot receiver.
Right. How short of the leash? I mean, you obviously talked about Taylor and a little bit of Baker Mayfield. How short is Taylor's leash? I mean, how quickly is the city of Cleveland going to be crying for Baker Mayfield if Taylor goes out there and has a horrible opening game in week 1, a poor performance in week 2? I mean, are the Browns going to stick with their guns and just really let Baker sit for at least the first half of the season, or are they potentially going to hit the panic button and throw him in there and have him throw to these guys?
Well, if you're Hugh Jackson, you probably don't want to hit the panic button because he's going to win some games to keep his job. And if you're John Dorsey, the GM has got some health problems, you have some rope because you're new. So there's no need to go to the immediacy effect of it. But it happens every year in this league. When you're at the top of the draft and you're a quarterback, and you are on a bad team, there's that constant push to get that player on the field because people start saying, well, we know what we are with Tyrod Taylor. We stink. You might as well look at the young guy. Best example of that would be Chicago last year with Mitchell Trubisky, and that was a mistake. He wasn't ready to play. But it's tough to sort of not give in to that. I don't think Cleveland wants to give into it. But obviously they're not going to be a playoff team. They're going to be an improved team. The question is, when do you pull the trigger? And a lot of that will have to do with Mayfield and how close he is to being ready.
John McMullen with us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as we preview the teams chasing the Eagles. Today it's Browns and Bears. If we're talking Browns, John, we got to talk Browns defense, specifically Myles Garrett. His rookie season had a little bit of an injury, obviously injury issues, but is Myles Garrett a guy that can now in year two, the light bulb goes on and be everything that the Browns thought they had when they drafted him?
Yeah, I mean, hey, he's got a ton of talent, and they knew that last year. You're right, though. There's some concerns about him being able to stay on the field for 16 games. And, look, that's favorite Chip Kelly quote. Best ability is availability. So it doesn't matter how talented you are. If you're not on the field, you can't help your team. He did have 7 sacks. I think the hope is – and really, there's no question if he's healthy and he's able to be out there, he's going to be a double-digit sack guy for a very, very long time. He's talent-wise, he's as good as you get as an edge rusher in this league. He's got everything you need. He's 6'4", 270. He's got the length. He's got the speed. He's got the strength. He could be, in 2 or 3 years, if he stays healthy, if he can stay on the field, he could be one of the 2 or 3 best edge rushers in football.
So, of course, he gets all the attention, John, but the guy on the other side, Emmanuel Ogbah, the other defensive end, is no slouch either.
No, and that's what I kind of said when I brought up Jacksonville. If you know, the Browns were a disaster at quarterback last year and forced to play Deshaun Kaiser, who obviously wasn't ready. But if you look at the rest of their roster, they were starting to get better. And you mentioned Garrett before. You mentioned Ogbah. But there's a lot of guys. Josh Gordon, we mentioned if he could stay on the field. And then they start signing players like Jarvis Landry. And then they have all the draft picks like David and Njoku and Jabril Peppers and players like that. And all of a sudden you're going to wake up one day and go, wow, the Browns got a lot of good players. And we're in the midst of getting there. It's funny to say about an 0-16 team, but you keep saying it. On the offensive line, we talked about Zeitler yesterday. He's one of the better guards in this league. And Michael Kendricks is there now. They already had Jamie Collins, who had all the success with New England. Now they have Demarius Randall in the secondary, former Packer. People are going to wake up and say, like I said, and they're going to go, wow, where did these guys come from?
Right, Demarius Randall in the secondary. One more on the Browns, so we'll get over to the Bears, John. But Denzel Ward, is that the cover corner they've been looking for?
Denzel. Yeah. I mean, I think they made a mistake at the top of this draft, but not because he's not a talent, just because they had an opportunity to get sort of Bradley Chubb. And then you say, well, you have Garrett, you have Chubb, you have Ogbah, who do you block? And I just think he was a better player. But Denzel Ward is a big-time prospect. They wanted a lockdown corner. They felt they already had enough on the pass rush. Yeah, I mean, if he could have sort of a Marcus Lattimore type effect on that secondary, they're coming, and they're coming quickly.
John, we're talking Cleveland Browns here. We're going to switch gears to the Chicago Bears. Now, you mentioned Mitchell Trubisky. What should we expect from him this year, and how important of a year is it for him? And a kind of two-parter here. Do the Bears have any legit chance to be real contenders in that division?
No, not in that particular division. And a lot of it does have to do I mean, it's like a Jared Goff situation. Mitchell Trubisky was awful last year, awful. And part of it was, John Fox was the head coach. They didn't have a good situation for a young quarterback. They forced him on the field, as I mentioned earlier, too quickly. And because of the pressure of taking them so highly in the draft, they were cutting the field in half, simple high-low reads. He's sort of a one-read and go guy, and it was not good. So now they brought in Matt Nagy, and they're trying to emulate two teams. They're trying to emulate what the Rams were able to do with Jared Goff, and they're trying to implement the Eagles system. It's a complete copycat of what the Eagles did here. Right. But I don't, the one thing missing, and people are comparing Trubisky to Wentz because they were both high-level draft picks.
Stop it.
Yeah, I'll Pete will probably get this reference. I'm around Carson a lot. Going to use Lloyd Benson. Mitchell Trubisky is no Carson Wentz.
No.
Senator, you are no John Kennedy. Yes, I got it right off the bat.
John, the Bears had literally the worst receivers in the NFL last year. Now they go out and they get Allen Robinson. Does that help them at all as far as the passing game, or is this just going to be the Jordan Howard show for them?
Well, it helps. I mean, they're better. They not only brought in Allen Robinson, but also Taylor Gabriel, Trey Burton,
right.
Former Eagles tight end.
That's going to be the difference.
Yeah, I know. And, people in Chicago are excited. And I tried to warn them. Trey's a limited player. If you think he's going to beat Zach Ertz, you got another thing coming. But
he could throw it to
better
Mitchell
than what they had. I will say that. And then, similar to what we talked about for different reasons and not proven at all, Josh Gordon, Kevin White, from a talent perspective, never been able to stay on the field. So you can't really count on him. But the hope is that if he can sort of develop into what people thought he was going to be at one point, maybe the whole unit is bolstered. But Mitch Trubisky is still throwing him the football. So a lot of this comes down to Matt Nagy, and can he implement the RPOs that were so successful in Kansas City and here with the Eagles? And it all emanates from Andy Reid. That's what they're going to try to do. They're going to try to turn him into not really Carson Wentz. They're going to try to turn him into Nick Foles. And what the Eagles did late in the season and in the playoffs with those quick RPOs, one read and go, because Mitch is just not the quarterback who can look over the field, survey things, and go from progression to progression.
Well, John, let's look on the other side of the ball for the Bears, because John Fox obviously gone, so Vic Fangio, now the defensive coordinator there, going to stay with the organization even after John Fox marches on. Is that a good move for the Bears, or should they have tried to replace their defensive philosophy at the top? They play a 3-4, by the way.
No, that was a good move. Vic is one of the better defensive coordinators in this league, and they were a good defense. That wasn't the issue with that team. And I think they'll be a good defense again. Not great, but they'll be in the top half of this league. And I think a lot of that has to do with Vic Fangio. He's going to always get the best out of the players he has. They have some talent at the linebacker position, and added Roquan Smith there this year. So they should be really good there at linebacker. The question is, up front, do they have enough? And in the secondary, are they good enough? And probably no, but he's the kind of guy like Rod Marinelli. They always get more out of what they have, greater than the sum of the parts, and he's that type of defensive coordinator.
Well, I'll go to the back end first, because I know they attempted to sign Malcolm Butler, but they ended up with Prince Amukamara. I'm going to say that's trying to win the lottery, and instead you got a free ticket.
Well, he's not a bad player.
He hasn't picked off a pass since 2015.
No, and that's the thing. He's not. He's really a good coverage guy, but he doesn't have great ball skills. So, there's worse corners that can't cover. and that's worse than at least having a guy who can cover and doesn't have the best ball skills in the world, is not going to make plays for you. Ultimately, obviously, you want to turn the ball over, and the Bears need to improve that aspect and get the plus-minus ratio up higher on the positive level. And they probably don't have the secondary to do that at this stage, but Amos is a good player at safety. Kyle Fuller had a bounce-back year, is their top corner. So they're not the worst secondary in the world, but, yeah, there's not a ton of playmakers.
Yeah, you scan through their roster, like Trevathan, for some reason, is the name that jumps out at me, and I don't know why, but you look at those three guys that are up front, Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, and Jonathan Bullard, and I don't think any of those three names are household names.
No, they're not, but Akeem Hicks is a good player, and sometimes when you do play a 3-4-2 gap, remember the defensive linemen are designed to sort of tie up blockers so the linebackers can make the plays. That's generally the philosophy there, unless you're J.J. Watt, who can do whatever the heck he wants, whenever he wants. But you generally, when you play that philosophy, you're not going to have a lot of splash plays from your defensive line. Doesn't necessarily mean they're not good players. And that's where Smith comes in, and Leonard Floyd, and as you mentioned, Danny Trevathan, who was a longtime starter in Denver. So that's probably where you remember him from. And those guys can make plays.
John McMullen with us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. We're going to continue our teams chasing the Eagles next week as we do the AFC and NFC, well, three of the teams in the NFC East next week as we wind our way down to training camp. If you want to see John's training camp previews, go to our website, 973ESPN.com, and check out his work there, or nationally at GetMoreSports.com. John, Chase Utley will finish with this. It looks like he's going to announce his retirement today, and Mike put up on the poll, Mike Gill did, if he does, in fact, retire at the end of the season, will all three of those Phillies games that are not next week, the week after, the 23rd, 24th, and 25th, will all three of those be sellouts at Citizens Bank Park?
Yeah, I'm going to go no.
I would no as well. I said 2 out of 3. I think the first one would be, I think the second one might be, but the third one's a 12:35 start time, too.
Yeah, three in a row for what they've been doing. I just don't think they can pull that off.
We were trying to figure out impactful Philadelphia athletes, like from 2008 on, and it was a hard game to pick the 10 most impactful Philadelphia athletes. Do you have some of those names? Because as we went through different Eagles, I said Donovan McNabb, and then I realized, oh wait, no, he was gone. You can't pick Donovan McNabb.
And Mike said, John, Brad Lidge arguably was the most impactful Philly athlete as far as one single season, and I completely disagree.
I wish Mike was here so I could yell at him. The most impactful athlete was Ryan Howard.
There you go.
And I'll tell you why. And if you go back to the World Series, the Phillies lost to the Yankees
9.
If you watch that series, now Chase Utley, the guy we're talking about, tremendous player, he was devastating in that series. Had a tremendous series. But if you watch the games, if you watch what the Yankees were trying to do, every time Ryan Howard came up to the plate, that's the guy they wanted to get out. That's the guy they bring in. I think it was DeMarco Murray at the time. He was a dominant left-handed reliever. They would not let him come to the plate in a situation where runners were on base. They were so concerned with him, they did everything possible to take him out of the series. They did. And in turn, they didn't care. And I think Chase hit 5 home runs. He deserves credit. But it just the way they treated Ryan Howard, he was the most devastating player on the best team in Philadelphia, obviously, over that era, best sports team. I don't think Ryan Howard gets enough credit for how dominant he was.
See, so you say Ryan Howard. The guy that Mike didn't think got enough credit was Cole Hamels. The Phillies names, John, we had were Utley, Rollins, Howard, Hamels, Halladay, and Lee. But just since you're a football guy, too, the Eagles names we threw out were Foles, actually, Vick, Wentz, Brandon Graham, Trent Cole, Malcolm Jenkins, and somebody texted in Brent Selleck.
Yeah, I mean, the Phillies were better at that time, so they had the more impactful players, and obviously Howard and Utley and Rollins would start. The thing about pitchers, they only pitch once every 5 days.
Right.
So as dominant as you can be, always the position player is going to be more impactful because he's out there every day.
And the closer even less.
Yeah, closers, I mean, unless you're Mariano Rivera, you see how baseball treats closers. They regard them as a dime a dozen. So I don't think you could ever look at a closer and say that's as impactful as an MVP type player.
You're certainly impactful to us, John McMullen, because every day at 4 o'clock we get to talk to you on the Boardwalk Honda hotline and find out all things Eagles and NFL. Have a good weekend, Johnny Mac.
Hey, you too, guys.